I've been working on getting my shuvit in all 4 stances recently, so I thought I'd quickly sit down and try to make a video about some tips for rolling shuvits by going over some of the common problems and some possible solutions to those problems. Now, there's no magic in any trick tip, but hopefully something in this video will be able to help you get to the shuvit a little bit faster. Tip 1. How to bring the back foot up. Not bringing the back foot up is a really common issue that often stems from a lack of confidence and/or a lack of practice and muscle. Skateboarding requires a lot of jumping, which we need muscle for, and it's also really scary to jump on a moving piece of wood, which we need confidence for. So I like to address both this muscle and confidence issue with jumping intense exercises that don't require doing a shuvit at all. You can use these exercises to focus on and practice for a few sessions before trying the shuvits again, or you can just pick and choose a couple of the exercises that you like and use them as a warm-up before practicing the shuvit. First of all, I love knee tuck jumps. If you cannot jump and touch your knees to your hands at a low angle, you might be struggling with the shuvit for reasons not related to your skate skills whatsoever. Now, I love these because they scale. You can start on the ground and then bring them into hippie jumps. You can jump on your board. You can jump onto the board. You can jump off one foot like you will be doing during the shuvit. You can just get creative and really work on strengthening those muscles. So while hippie knee tuck jumps are my favorite, there are lots of good tricks to also try that will help you work on both the muscle you need to jump and the practice of jumping onto the deck that will help with confidence. Hippie jumps, body varials, the caveman, yo-yo hops, feet stomp, boneless. The bottom line is to jump on the board. It might not seem like the best use of your time, but if you're struggling to get that back foot up, it really might be the best use of your time. And then once you can do all of this, my last tip is to hold out your hands and try to touch your knees to them when you do the shuvit. Even if they don't come close, it's a good mental reminder to bring your knees up. You can see here that my feet and knees often reach the same peaks when doing the shuvit. So if one foot is much higher than the other, if your back foot is not coming off the ground, I highly recommend these exercises. Speaking of jumping, tip 2 is to jump forward or lean forward when doing the shuvit. Now, this is something that actually used to be particularly frustrating for me, and that's because when I would watch tutorials for shuvits or when I would watch professionals do a shuvit, they didn't really jump forward. In fact, it looked like the board just rotated underneath them. But that's because they've done it 1,000 times. They built up the muscles, they put in the work already. So don't be discouraged that your shuvit looks different and do what you need to. If the board is landing in front of you, in front of your toes, jump forward as much as you need to. Sometimes all you need to do is lean a little more forward over your toes and your body will naturally want to jump forward. This is all part of learning and progressing, and I'm really happy to say that the better my shuvit got, the distance that I needed to jump forward definitely decreased, and it decreased a lot. So don't worry, just put in the hard work and you're going to get there. Tip 3. Stepping off the deck. In a similar vein, stepping off the toe-side edge of your deck is another issue related to jumping and leaning. It's funny because I didn't struggle with this a lot when I first was learning my shuvits, but now that I've been doing shuvits for over a year, it's an issue that has suddenly presented itself. You might be jumping too far or leaning too far forward over your toes. So just troubleshoot. If you're falling over your toes, you typically need to lean a little back towards your heels. And if you're falling back towards your heels, you typically need to lean a little more forward toward your toes. That's the relationship they have. It just takes a lot of time to develop that muscle memory for just how far you need to lean and how hard you need to pop the back foot. So really, all you can do is troubleshoot and always remember to bend your knees when landing, because you will step forward off the board way more often with your legs and knees straightened out. The bend in your knees will help you absorb some of the force from you jumping towards your toes and help keep you from stepping off and over the board. I think part of my issue is that because I made such great progress with them, I've started to relax a little bit too much when I do them. So definitely going forward, I need to remember to bend my knees more and not lean quite so far forward. Tip 4, you don't have to scoop a shuvit. Now, I have seen people scoop a shuvit where the foot both pushes down and then nudges the board forward, kind of at a diagonal, but you don't need to scoop the shuvit. And in fact, I much prefer the method of pushing the tail straight back to do a shuvit, and here's why. A lot of beginners either push the tail down and forward towards the nose naturally, or they confuse the pop shuvit scoop with the shuvit pushback. And I think a part of this is because a lot of videos teach these two tricks in the same video, because they're very similar, but they're actually fundamentally different. The tail does not touch the ground when you do a shuvit, and you don't need to scoop the board because you're not fighting against the friction caused when the tail hits the ground, like when you're doing a pop shuvit. If you scoop the board, you will often push the board out in front of you like this. This is something I struggled with for months before realizing what was going on. But the moment I stopped scooping and started pushing straight back with my back foot, I immediately fixed the issue. But I will say that I can see how being able to scoop a shuvit might be beneficial for a more advanced skater, because when you're going a lot faster, I can see how if you just pushed back, any friction under those wheels would definitely slow the board down. And we know that when the board slows down and my body doesn't, I end up in front of the nose of my skateboard. So I could see how being able to nudge the board forward a little bit with a scoop might be beneficial for an advanced skater who is skating much faster. In my experience, scooping the board as a beginner does cause a lot of problems though, which is why I would recommend not doing it that way. However, I'm also a big supporter of learning a trick in a way that's comfortable for you. Tip 5. Under rotation and landing in front of the nose. I'm sure there's different reasons that can lead to the deck under rotating when doing a shuvit, but the one I want to talk about today is weak shuvits. But when the board under rotates, you probably just need to try putting some more strength into your shuvits. You can work on this by flicking your ankle harder, or you can also try to bend your knees a little more when jumping, which will naturally encourage you to jump a little bit harder, and see if that helps. Remember, we all come from different muscle backgrounds, levels of fitness, and athleticism. Some skaters with strong calves will be able to do shuvits with just their calves and ankles, while other skaters might need to use their quads as well. Don't worry if your shuvit looks different than others. Work with your body to see how much force that you need to use. Now, I particularly wanted to talk about weak shuvits because this tip might also help if your body is landing in front of the nose when you do a shuvit. You can see here that both sets of trucks and wheels come off the ground for a clean shuvit. If the back wheels stay on the ground, they get caught by the friction and will rotate in that spot, bringing the nose behind you. That's what often happens when your body is landing in front of the board. When those trucks and wheels stay on the ground, they can stop the board while your body continues forward. So it's important to both experiment with force and remember that the rougher the ground, the more force you're probably going to need. Doing a shuvit in a parking lot typically requires more force than doing a shuvit on smooth concrete at a skate park. And it just has to do with the amount of friction that you're fighting against to get those wheels off the ground. That's also why a shuvit in the grass tends to take a lot more strength, because you have to fight with the ground and the grass in order to get the board to spin. Tip 6. What causes the board to flip? This is really interesting because I have never had this issue ever, which is why when some people would comment on my shuvit trick tip about their board flipping, I really had no idea what could have been causing it because I had never seen it before. Until now, of course. Now I actually have a theory on what's happening, because when I was trying to film the footage for this video, my board was flipping like crazy. I almost couldn't get it to stop flipping. So of course I had to thoroughly review the footage, and while looking at the clips frame by frame, I noticed something really, really interesting about my trucks. You can see right here that the board flipped when my trucks had a very strong and solid pinch between the deck and the wheel. Now, this is the first setup I've ever ridden with such loose trucks, and I think that's the problem. I think that when the trucks pinch like this, they basically act as a spring to flip the board over as it rotates. And you can see here that the flipping just never occurs when there isn't a pinch of the trucks. And because I've always ridden my trucks so tight, I don't think this has ever been a problem for me. So if your deck is flipping a lot, you could try to tighten your trucks a little more so that you can reduce how easy it is to pinch them. Or you could also try to adjust your foot positioning away from the pocket, because the pocket is where it's easiest to pinch the trucks. So you can move your foot a little bit closer to the end of the tail or a little bit more towards the center. Basically, just try to get it a little more away from that pocket. And then another thing you could also try would be to focus a little more on pushing back than you are pushing down. Just trying to get your foot to not pinch the trucks somehow. Hopefully one of those tips or a combination of them can help you if you're struggling with the deck flipping. But do be aware and do be patient that this is kind of a tricky problem to fix just because there's so many variables involved. Tip 7, open shoulder. A tip that's always mentioned, and for good reason, is opening up your shoulders. And I actually just made a video defining what this is, but the TLDR is that open shoulders are when your shoulders are not parallel to the board and are turning open toward the heel side edge of your deck. So if you're a regular skater, that means your shoulders open up to the left, and if you're a goofy skater, that means your shoulders open up to the right. Now, why is this a problem? It's a problem because our feet like to be directly below our shoulders. Take a look at this. When I jump with my shoulders turned like this, my hips naturally turn until my feet are back under my shoulders. Now, this means that when you do a shuvit with your shoulders open, most of the time it will be hard to get both your feet back on the board. There are a few things we can do about this based on the reason we're opening up our shoulders while we're doing the shuvit. Reason 1, it's natural. It's super natural to want to face the direction that we're rolling. That's how we push after all. So for some of us, it's just a matter of being aware of this. Something I do that I'm pretty sure I heard from Sean Brown was to do this little arm crossing thing. Cross your hands in front of you and then bring your arms up and out in a line with your deck when you jump. It forces your attention to your shoulders, and it's one of the reasons I've adopted this habit. Reason 2 is lack of strength. It might be because you're trying to use your shoulders instead of your back leg to do the shuvit. It can be weird to get your back foot to push behind you at first, and sometimes we compensate for a lack of strength and board control in the back foot by rotating our shoulders and bodies. So you might just be jumping in that direction to help make the board spin. I still do this when trying to do nollie shuvits and switch shuvits, because my front foot is just much weaker. But try to focus on using the strength in your back legs and not your shoulders or hips. Tip 8, comfort. If you cannot ride like this, the shuvit might not be your issue at all. You might just need more time on your board just riding. I definitely understand there's a rush to learn tricks when starting to skateboard, but trust me, you will learn tricks much faster if you're a good rider. It's a lot harder to learn tricks, especially while rolling, if you're not comfortable enough rolling around at all. I can definitely say that in my experience, the better I got at riding, the easier it was for me to learn tricks while rolling. Tip 9, should you try it fakie? I see a lot of people recommend that beginner skaters learn the rolling shuvit fakie first. And fakie is basically just rolling in the opposite direction that you're normally rolling in. It's definitely not bad advice, but there is a caveat. It's not as simple as learning the fakie shuvit is easier. It definitely wasn't easier for me to learn the rolling shuvit fakie. It was a lot easier to learn it rolling in my regular stance. And that's because I never really skated fakie back then. I was really comfortable rolling in my regular stance, and I was really uncomfortable rolling fakie, so it's no surprise that fakie shuvits were a no-go for me, at least at that time. But the reason that it's easier to do a fakie shuvit is that it actually takes a little bit less strength to do a shuvit fakie. They're easier to rotate, and they're easier to rotate because there's less friction when you're doing the shuvit in the fakie direction. Now, I don't have the exact scientific terminology, and it's kind of difficult for me to articulate this because it just makes so much sense in my head. But basically, when you do a regular shuvit, the back trucks have to leave the ground because if they scrape on the ground, they'll get stuck and not have a full rotation. But this isn't as much of a problem with the fakie shuvit. When you roll fakie, the nose can freely rotate around the back trucks even if they're still on the ground. The back trucks and wheels don't have as much friction to fight against when rolling fakie. But just because it reduces the friction doesn't mean it's going to be easier for you. So try both and see what feels comfortable. I hated fakie shuvits in the beginning, and now I absolutely love them because they just feel extra snappy, and it's gotta be because of the reduced friction, but I'm just loving them. Anyways, I have some skating to do, so I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see you next time.
Side.